So one of the things that I was actually curious about, this writer friend of mine once said that it's very important to a story in terms of, for instance, if you're writing a biography of a person, it's very important how you begin it. In the sense, do you begin with his birth or do you begin with his death? Yeah, and that will change, obviously it'll inflect the rest of the narrative in a certain way. So as I see your film, I hesitate to call it a history of Calcutta because history is a rather abused term in our times. But it's a kind of a strange bricolage of many things, of you, this person, the gentleman who's the first shot we see, a certain timeline of the city itself. So actually it's a film which is also about time for me more than anything, and the relationship of time and urban and modernity, lots of things. But to begin with, I was curious, two things. One, why does your timeline, textual timeline, begin with 17th century? And second, connected to that, your visual sort of, the film opens with the death, with the loss, which is a very personal loss. So both these, which I don't know if they're connected or they're not, but in my head, I don't know. So if you could talk a little bit about it, basically.
Okay, it's a difficult question. Thank you for the question. And I would love to hear if you made a connection in that, what it is. Okay, first part of the question, why we start with the death of Omyoda. See, this is actually a sequel of a film which I made 10 years back called Chronicle of an Amnesiac or Bhultir Khero, which was my first film after I graduated from my film school. And in that film, Omyoda was a very important character. I mean, it was also a film on a kind of trying to look at a historicity of the city from the texture that is present. That was the idea of that film, and thinking what will go into the domain of amnesia. While we finished the film, Omyoda, a 92-year-old gentleman, was like he was more energetic than us, taking us around and opening a city up, which we never saw, even if I have lived there for 43 years. And by the time we were almost finishing the fine cut of that film, Omyoda had a stroke and passed away. While we were making that film, we already knew that it is not just that 24 or 25-minute film I was making for Japanese broadcaster NHK, but I knew that there is a bigger film that I have a responsibility to work on, because of the possibility that got opened up with the gentleman. So it was quite an obvious point for me to begin with his passing and bring back his memory with other present occurrences. That's why very consciously we kind of merged Omyoda's house and our friend Tapati's house almost like together. One is past time 10 years back, one is today. Now, there's also one more very important point. I was thinking of beginning the film for some time, I had the idea from 2007 only, or 2006, that I have to make a larger film. But I still didn't find a point from where I actually will be beginning, not in the physical beginning of the film, but on a much more conceptual level. And that happened while our very good friend and artist colleague, Tapati, we were also knowing that Tapati's house, they will be leaving that house and move to the new town, and we're planning to do some, maybe some performances, some, some alternative art thing in the house to trace the memories and all that. But all of a sudden that the house, one portion of the house collapsed, and it also killed a couple of persons, and it was a quite unsettling thing. I'm sure, I don't know how much unsettling it was for Tapati, but it was quite unsettling for me, and I realized that, boss, we have to start it now. Talking about the second part of your question, if you look at working on a time image, it is not history but the historicity. There is moment that Omyoda talks about. Even in the prequel, Omyoda talked about moments. He, coming from a Marxist theory, moments very important. But also you have to look at it in a phenomenological way. You have to also look at epochs. So I find the history of the Delta is a mix of the moment and the epochs. Right. So, and then there is no linearity of time, Yeah. So I started with 17th century, went back to 1st century BC, came to again 17th century, went forward. I mean, that's because just to break the traditional linearity of time, because time is not linear, time is memetic. You call time from here, everything is in present otherwise.
Yes.
So yeah, that's why this kind of restructuring.
Yeah. No, actually, the reason I also brought it up is because this is true for, I think, a lot of, at least South Asian cities, how a lot of our stories actually begin with a certain history of colonialism in a certain way, because that's also the first time that a certain kind of documentation, a certain kind of image is getting formed, right, in a formal way.
Also, see, the knowledge we have, the way our education system and everything is heavily borrowed from the Western system, So for me to go, it is a travel back, basing on this westernized education that I've got of history. So then it is not that beginning from 2nd century, but actually for my time it starts from the British time and has to go back.
Absolutely.
So that is probably another way.
If there are any comments or feedback or questions on the film, we can order.
I really like the aspect of the film where when we're looking at history and we're trying to read it through textbooks or whatever other mediums, we're generally trying to look for a linear narrative and something that kind of makes sense. But what I really appreciate about this film is that it makes me lose sense of that narrative. Like, it keeps breaking it for me. I'm trying to latch on to something, but at the same time it makes me think about something else. Constantly gives me new material. And I really like that thing about history. Like, if you go into any kind of historical study, whether it's about World War or the ancient world or the modern history, there are just too many things happening. Now, is this a very conscious choice that you took, or is this something that happened by chance when you were making the film?
No, it is a completely conscious choice. And also, this is kind of a form that I've been working on. To be very honest, a little bit teaching experience I also have. In the direction theory class, first thing I say that it is not a film history class. We don't look at a museum. Historicity is when I am here looking back at the history and kind of trying to create a meta time. So it is probably the way I believe in cinema, that's what is reflecting.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the film, and I guess a lot of references are there which are still untold, but it could be done, I don't know, in some extended lecture about that film. I also know Bulada very well in Kolkata. I'm just a friend of him. So I know that this person who did actually a first a first rock band in India in 70s. So this thread even could go further if you keep asking him, you can make one more film based on him and his experience and his elder brother who is no more, and Mohinder Ghoraguli, all these things. So there are a lot of threads in these films comes together for me. But I wanted to remember, the Günter Grass, who came to Kolkata in 1985, 86 twice, and he was so shocked by the city as such, he could not write. Actually, the writer who came to the city for inspiration for writing could not write. Instead of writing, he started drawing, and making a series of collage of sketches of Kolkata in 80s. So I guess this kind of film is very much similar to Günter Grass, to his experience. And it was produced not only by you, but also by the zeitgeist, by the city
absolutely.
itself. I feel it very much Kolkatian, and very much Bengali, but Kolkatian first of all. So I could feel the energy of the city inside, which broke the time lineage, which broke the single narrations. A lot of Armenian, it could be also Parsi study, in Bo Bazar there is a Agyari, which belongs to Banerjee. It's a perfect story again to tell, because it was totally surrounded by hawkers. The Agyari, which is a temple of light for Parsi, totally collapsed and almost vanishing, but a lot of other people who are very poor, who are newcomers, but they sell the lanterns, which is quite peculiar. A lot of anecdotes you could be told. Itself, the city gives you all these stories. Just pick up and make. Yeah. So my congratulations, I like it very much. And I feel these films need a little bit more contextualization. So it needs to be supported by some other narratives as well, just for showing, like texts.
Thank you very much for your observation, because I don't feel I make a film myself. It's my first prerogative. I came from a film school where we made films. I'm a director, so I'm the artist responsible. I don't belong to this humanist gaze where I am the artist in the center. No, I am not. That is one very basic thing that my film aesthetics is based on. And secondly, yes, there are a lot of things which I touch upon, but I would not elaborate because I think a seeker will seek. Like exactly like Bulada and Mohiner Ghoraguli. I've been working with Bulada for 20 years now, or maybe more. It was the first time I actually credited him with Mohiner Ghoraguli. Because it's very important that suddenly, other than just a musician, he becomes a character, you know. This Nakshal movement and them having to actually withdraw from that movement made Mohiner Ghoraguli happen. Because that energy, that angst, got channelized into India's first rock band. Very few people in this hall, I think, knows about it. In fact, many Bollywood films have stolen those songs. One major one is by Pritam. And nobody knows. I'm working on this kind of history which is getting into the domain of amnesia. So for me, this is material, you know. Yep.
So actually, just to sort of take this thought forward, what the lady just shared, it's actually true for so many of, again, South Asian cities, isn't it? This kind of pre and post modernity that coexists, you know, and this is a part of our, I think, social, cultural, psychological landscape. This is, I think, very distinct to our kind of, if there can be called a cultural identity, in a sense. But what I was also struck by in the form of your film, there's obviously a lot of research that's gone into it, right? And there are parts of it, for instance, the entire commerce section, which I'm assuming as a narrative you could have decided to actually not have people speak on camera, because there are particularly the journalist and the gentleman who talks about the Jain commerce in a particular way, or Marwadi, sorry. There could have been creative choices where perhaps you could have decided to use text and not those particular bites, because you know you're there for a short period of time with these characters and then you quickly move away, and so they say what they have to say. So there's that kind of storytelling on the one hand in the film, and on the other you're also employing a lot of performance artists to, for lack of a better word, to recreate certain moments, say, in the history, right? Either the mythological image or you know, the Naxal, the idea of the violence, or the Kali itself, the lady who sort of, you know, the character, whatever, in the film. So I wanted you to kind of talk a little bit about how you think, or how you thought through the idea of research, which must have been vast, and the edit, and sort of this kind of storytelling form, which is, for the lack of a better word, kind of talking verbose in one way, and is also punctuated by these other, you know, like these cartographic marks getting projected on the river, you know, like that. So if you could talk a little bit about this kind of a mixed hybrid form, a little bit.
We born hybrid times, so I love to have a hybrid form. That is first. Second thing is, coming back to the faces, it's very important to preserve faces. Say 50 years from now, if somebody, if the film survives for that long, wants to look back, because documents give one kind of historicity, but it is also anthropology. You have to see faces and their lived experiences. This gentleman who is talking about Marwari, and I have a major problem with censor board because of him, his talk, but he himself is a Marwari. It's actually being critical, but also praising Marwari in a very big way, you know. He's clearly saying that even if we say that Tagore family started first banks, but it is actually Marwari started. So it's very interesting, but you have to allow this personal history come from the persons. Because if you depersonalize them, you can make it universal, can be of any time. Sure. But I don't want that. I want that personalization. Because a documentary cannot document. It maximum freezes a moment around the subject. Right? Yeah, so then that's why.
Yeah. And this other sort of a fluid, for the lack of a better word, art form, this idea of the contemporary artist intervening in the space. Could you talk a little about that?
How to say? I have been into many medium, you know. I started writing poetry much before. I didn't want to be a filmmaker, but I happened to become a filmmaker. The day I graduated from my institute, we were part of a large art collective. For 7 years, we organized an international performance art festival in Calcutta. I'm very excited about the post-cinema forms to come back to cinema and see what's the dialogue possible. So yeah, these are the reason.
Right. Any other questions, since we're very short on time? Yes.
I thought that the space invested or given to the dialogue on the Marxist and Congress bit was the biggest chunk of conversation given. And I just wanted to know why that was.
I didn't look at it in this way, but it is more of, you see, as the film progresses, like, okay, let me talk in this way, that how do I look at structuring? Because that is most important. See, I don't come from an art background. I studied physics. To me, structuring is thermodynamic. I mean, if anybody understands what I mean. I mean, it means that it's an entropic structure. Entropy is a very important point of your structure. So what happens is, if I would have got this gentleman talking this thing in the beginning, there would have been, it would be in such an energetic or entropic space that I cannot hold that for that long, you know. So they have to go find their seat somewhere and part of the entropic structure. And having said that, also because they are there and it is such an important part of the city's just immediate recent past history and not very well, it has been documented quite much, but not in a very personalized way. And these people with whom I live my life, I told you, Bulada I'm working with him for 20 years. Or this gentleman who is actually speaking up about, this almost 90-year-old man opening up this. Or, so you have to give time. So it's because of these reasons that I decided very consciously not even picturize them, but be on their face on those interviews. Yep.
Thank you very much, Anirban.
Yep.
We're terribly out of time, so I'm being
No,
told
that's
to
okay.
wrap this up, but it was a pleasure, really. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.